So I'm going to run through a very basic reverb tutorial here. I'm not interested in creating verbs for drums, mixes, the 3 master verbs for gloss, sheen, and so on and so on. All I want to do is explain to you how using something as simple as Cubase's stock reverb plugin, which is Revelation. And by using Revelation, we can actually create some lovely, lovely textures. We can work with proximity effects. We can work with room modes. There's lots that you can do, so long as you understand the structure of how reverbs behave. I don't want to get too much into what a reverb is. If you need any kind of primer tutorials, please visit my websites, either samplecraze.com or theaudioproductionhub.com. Sign up to the Audio Production Hub. Take a week's membership. It'll be free because the trial is free for a week. It's over 140 videos there, and just hit the reverb section. There's detailed explanations on how reverbs behave, what reverb is, and so on, and what the different types of reverbs are, plates, impulse responses, room modes, spring reverbs, and so on. There's countless video examples with exercises to follow as well. If there's anything that I haven't covered that you'd like me to cover, just drop me a note, either in Klaus's forum, on his Facebook page, or on the Samplecraze page, which is again on Facebook. Very quickly, I want you to listen to this track sent to me by Chris Timpson. The track is sung by a trio. I think it's Chris, his lovely lady, and one of his friends. So we got 2 male voices. One is mono center, one is pan right, and a female voice pan left. It's called Cutty Wren, and there is a reason I've picked this track. You'd have probably expected me to hone in on an EDM or a hip-hop track, but I feel that a stereo track of a group stem of vocals is complicated enough to work with, and if you can cover the frequency ranges that are within this file, then you'll be able to cover pretty much everything, with the exception of syncopated beats, which I've covered in other video tutorials. Right, very quick listen. I'm not going to play the whole thing. I just want you to hear how we go from a center mono bass voice, pan out to left and right female and male voices.
To hunt the cutty wren, says John the Red-Nosed. To hunt the cutty wren, says John the Red-Nosed.
I haven't cleaned this file up. I haven't got rid of any pops or clicks or de-essed it or anything. I just want to dive straight into this. Otherwise, it'll become a 1-hour video tutorial. Let me play this now, running through the reverb that I've created. Let me switch off the delay. This will be in an ensuing tutorial, because basically how I structure my delays and reverbs is I tend to feed one into the other, you know, for that nice rounded depth sound where you've got this bouncy delay going on. But again, that's for another tutorial. I'm using a send from the vocal track to Revelations here, which is an effects channel, and I've got it at -5.48. We could go a little bit lower on this if we want.
You says vessel to foes, to hunt the cutty wren, says John the Red-Nosed. To hunt the cutty wren, says John the Red-Nosed.
When you try and work with a reverb to create more a proximity effect, i.e. presence and intimacy, you'll find that early reflections are your best friend. I think they give you more information than the tail does itself, because the tails often sum. Think about this. You have reflectors that come back to you and sit on top of each other, causing standing waves. And this will just reverberate in a room and actually build up and sound quite congested. I tend to work with the early reflections a lot more when I'm trying to work around the concept of presence and intimacy, and if I need to drench something and create masses of space, then I get into the tail. So what I've done here is work with a combination of both. The early reflections tell you a great deal about, first, the size of the room and what the nearest reflective surface is, but more importantly, it gives you a lot of information about the actual absorption qualities of that reflective surface. The problem you always have with reverbs is low energy buildup. So filtering is quite critical at this stage. And I have performed all the filtering within the actual reverb itself. So let's kick off here and let me take the actual tail down to 0 and just have a listen to what happens when I move the pre-delay here back to 0 and play the audio back to you. And we'll start here.
To hunt the cutty wren, says John the red-nosed. To hunt the cutty wren, says John the red-nosed.
Why have I put a pre-delay in on the early reflections? We need to separate the start of the reflections from the dry audio itself. And to do that, we use the pre-delay. So if I can extend this whole engine to start a little later, I can have the transients of the vocals, which are the plosives at the start of every word, shine through. If I had pre-delay at 0 and extended this and put this up, this is what you'd get.
Older. Oh, I may not tell you, says Vessel to fall.
So you can hear the reverb straight away, and you can hear it on every single letter at the start of the words. The more the sort of the pronounced dominant transients are drenched in reverb. So what we need to do is to just push them away and get them to start a little later, leaving exactly the same settings. Let's have a listen now.
To hunt the cutty wren, says John the red-nosed.
You're getting reverb from start to finish, and it's smearing every transient. So let's push it away. Another way of cleaning this up even further and making it more intimate and giving it more presence is to work more with early reflections than the actual tail. And you can see with the visual display here what's happening to the tail. If I go up here, I've got a lot of tail. If I bring this down, I'm working more with early reflections. Now listen to the audio and how cleaner it sounds, and let's extend this to around, now 40 will be too much, it'll be a bit of an echo, about there.
The cutty wren, says John the red-nosed.
So what we've done now is apply and give the vocals a little bit of space, presence and intimacy. You'll find that with reverbs, and if I extend this further up and drag this up a little, you'll hear that the sound actually starts to go further back in the mix.
Mulder, oh, where are you going?
So when Chris sings "Oh where," that "Oh where" sounds as if it's in the back of the room as opposed to the front.
Oh, where?
Whereas if I bring this down, drop this down to a slightly more sensible level, and we do that again.
Oh, where are you going, says Mildred.
Now Chris sounds not just as if he's standing in front of me, but a little further back. But the start of every word sounds as if it's in front of me. What is the impression that gives you when something starts in front of you and ends up further back? Depth. Without the pre-delay and with only using the tails, you're not going to have that motion of start to the end of the depth. So nothing's at the front. Make full use of your pre-delay and your mix between early and tail. Yes, standard is to leave it at 50, but depending on whether you want intimacy and presence, more early reflections. If you want room modes where you want to hear the big space that a sound is in, go for far more towards the tail. And think about this in terms of the logistics. If you are in a big space and your sound starts, well, your early reflections are going to be further away, aren't they? So it doesn't make sense to have this and then acres of this. It's just not going to sound natural. Have a listen to this now.
To Mulder. Oh, I may not tell you, says Fat.
So we've got that wispy hanging decay. What else do we need to think about? All we've done here is deal with the mix of the early reflections and the tail and the pre-delay. You might want to ask me, and you're perfectly right in doing so, how do I work out what the value is for the pre-delay? You can either, and I've created about 2 videos on this, how to work out the synced values against the BPM and how to manage your pre-delays using that. Or the second way is a little bit more intuitive in the sense that it's a subjective decision. We can actually find where the transients of the initial letters in a word start and where they end. And by doing that, I came to a value around 29 milliseconds on my pre-delay. I've extended it just to show you how we can create the more drier, intimate effect. Now let's talk about the size of the early reflections. This is quite interesting because I could opt to go from a very big size early reflection into a very small size room mode. What is that going to tell you about the space you're in? Think about that. This will give you something that's more a shape that starts big and narrows in, a bit like a cone. If we want to create stairwell effects using ether or something like that, we'll start with bigger sized early reflections ending into a smaller sized room. You could also do this vice versa. You could start in a hallway and end up in an auditorium. Just work inversely with the room modes and the sizes. We've then got low and high cut. I tend to find that with early reflections, the information that's imparted to us is that about the absorption qualities of the surface that the sound is actually reflecting off. It is your decision whether you are going for something that's quite heavy sounding in terms of the room that you're in. So, for example, I've been in rooms where the vocals are so dry that I've actually had to excite them to extensive low cuts just to make them sound less woolly and heavy. So use your high cuts and low cuts for the early reflection to get that nice precision clarity on the intimacy value. What is more important is the high cuts here and here on control. Modulation I've left off for now because we're not interested in these sort of wobble effects or chorusy effects using reverb. But this is critical, and I quite like this, that Steinberg have given us a control value here. Low time, low frequency, high time, high frequency. Think of this as driving energy at the cutoff point of what you select on your frequencies here. I found that 8.153 kilohertz sounded great boosted, but I dropped everything at 2 kilohertz. Have a listen. Let me take this up to about 30 so you can hear everything. Now listen to what happens when I boost this.
Hunt the cutty wren, says John the Red-Nosed.
And vice versa.
Hunt the cutty wren, says John the Red-Nosed. And how shall we catch him?
It's a wonderful little sort of, it's actually akin to a graphic EQ. Just boost, pick your energy value, and how I selected this was to work out the airband by putting a band pass across this, and the airband dropped at about 6 kilohertz. And I thought, well, let me go to 8 kilohertz or thereabouts and boost the hell out of it. So I gave it more presence. But what I wanted to do was drop all the bass, the low energy out of this, so it didn't sound like I was in a huge reverberation kind of chamber. Use the visual display here to sort of see dissipation and what have you. Now, if you've got a value of 32.5 there, do you then go for a 32.5 here? Let's have a listen.
As Mulder to Mulder, oh, where are you going? Says Mulder to Mulder. Oh, I may not tell you, says Fassel.
So you end up with this doubling effect, and to be honest, we can do that here as well.
To foes, to hunt the cutty wren, says John.
Rule of thumb, and I've never really agreed with this rule of thumb, is to try and match your pre-delay on the early reflections to the pre-delay on the tail. It's a great starting point, but I tend to find that if I have a pre-delay running at around, let's say 30, I always like to push it a bit further here, maybe 34, 35, just to give that space for the early reflection to dissipate and start with the main tail. Room size, again, up to you. Do you want a big chamber? Do you want a small intimate room? Up to you. Main time is decay of the reverb. I found that anything sort of, in this particular example, beyond around about 37% or something, it was just too much. Shape, don't worry about that for now. Shape will denote the room shape or the shape of the response of the actual tail of the reverb, which is a more accurate definition of what's happening. Density is very important. I tend to say to my students, look at the visual display here. You can see what we've done here. No density.
To hunt the cutty wren, says John the Red-Nosed.
Nice density.
And how shall we catch him?
Too much density, and you can hear it. It's got this sort of very heavy low energy value going on, which is just too much. find the right spot, and I found this to be about 60 to 70 here, and I've got a high cut. I estimated if I'm boosting a lot of energy here at about 8 kilohertz, by the time it's dissipated with this value, I'd need to be looking at about 11, 12 kilohertz as the end of my airband. So I've picked the value just below 11 kilohertz and cut everything above it out. Width, because I'm using a stereo file here with pans going left and right, I can afford to go anywhere from 50 to 100.
Says Mulder to Mulder, oh, where are you going? Says Mulder to...
Use stereo wideners sensibly. If you understood the process of how we widen stereo sounds, you'll understand that you will get collapse if you extend the left and right too far. I'm safe here. Why? Because I've already got two vocals panned left and right, and Chris is staying mono center. So I can afford to get a bit brave with this. However, saying that, I found that around 80, 85 was more than enough for this. And you gauge that when the layered vocals come in, i.e. the female, male doubling up vocals here. Then you'll know if you've spread it too far.
To hunt the cutty wren, says John the Red-Nosed.
So at around 100%, it was just widening too much, and I was starting to sort of lose cohesion around the center channel. Don't get too heavy unless you're dealing with a mono sound or a stereo sound that's panned center or panned absolute left and right with no mono center information. Otherwise, stick around these values. That's pretty much all I want to cover for now, but what I do want to do is to vary these while you're listening to create these different types of room modes.
And how shall we catch him, says Mulder to Mulder. Oh, where are you going?
So more intimate and closer up.
Mulder to Mulder. Oh, I may not tell you, says Faisal to Foz. To hunt the cutty wren, says John the Red-Nosed. To hunt the cutty wren,
this is
says John the...
as centered and intimate as you will get, because I've matched both the pre-delay to the delay of the tail, so I'm not really allowing for too much dissipation on the early reflections. Room size I'm not too happy with, to be honest, with these settings, so let's start to bring that back.
The red nose, and how shall we catch him, says Mulder to Mulder. Oh, where are you going, says Mulder.
And now, by bringing it back to early reflections, we bring the center back.
Oh, I may not tell you, says Faisal to Foz.
So just use things in order and sensible construction. Always duplicate your values and then pull back or push forward with them. Don't start with arbitrary figures. It doesn't work like that. Otherwise, you end up with very odd-shaped rooms. What we're trying to do with a vocal piece like this, that's an a cappella, and it's a three-piece with pans, is to keep everything coherent, intimate, but give it depth. Very simple this was, and a very quick tutorial. Enjoy yourselves. You can get all manner of textures from using stock plugins. In the old days, we didn't have the processing power and the algorithms weren't that good. So whenever you tried to do something funky with reverbs, you ended up with this grainy metallic sound. Stock plugins are good enough to overcome that now. And remember, I've only been working with a hall. There comes a point when if you're working with just a hall, two small values just don't make sense, and you'll end up with more smearing than anything else. If I was to drop this now into Studio and you had to listen, the response changed straight away. Have a look at that. Keep an eye on here at the early reflection section. There. It's literally an inversion on the attack. So let's pick Studio and now listen.
Oh, where are you going, says Mulder to Mulder. Oh, I may not tell you, says Faisal to Foz. To hunt the cutty wren.
Sounds lovely, clean, and a little bit of wisp at the end. As I said, experiment with the different room modes. If you need any brush ups or primers on this, go to both my websites and have a look at all the freebies there. And I've got reverb tutorials and everything there.